everybody knows you're not supposed to label a child.
The houses are literally domestic violence.
We've gotten to this point where anything that's not standard is less. A child never does anything without a reason.
They're shouting, they're screaming, they're the nicest people. It's just there's this edge.
Oh, it's a normal kid with a high IQ. That's just not true.
Today I have the honor of hosting and having a very special guest, Mrs Osrin, who specializes in child education. And from my experience working with you, I think your expertise in child education as a whole, and then with a specific specialty with kids that are neurodiverse or very, very, as you call them. Thank you for being here again. So the timing is great. I've been wanting to do a podcast with you for a while, and to really help people understand that there is potential and possibility despite of what the circumstance with their child and their house looks like. And I'm really excited to host a 12-week course for parents that are struggling with very, very kids, with difficult circumstances, with a lack of understanding of how to go about and the traditional advice and maybe what worked for other kids didn't work. And in this episode, besides discussing some practical ideas and tools and mindsets that might help them already, and we're also going to introduce the 12-week course of what it's about and how it can help and how a course is different than one-on-one work, and maybe also get some insight of how one-on-one work with you can help them. I'm very excited to do that. Can you share a little bit of your background and how this course and your work came about?
Right, so I started in this really for my own kids, right? I started it as in gifted education for kids who are really bored in school, maybe bored at home as well, who are struggling because they're more than other people, not less. But somehow in our society, we've gotten to this point where anything that's not standard is less. Like, if you're not, you could be more, you can be cleverer, but that's still kind of less because you're not in the box. And it's just like such a crazy attitude. And we came to the point where, they start struggling with all different things. They struggle with self-esteem or with the social skills and with listening to their parents. There's like a whole set of skills that these kids are not developing. And I went back to school to learn how to help these kids develop the kind of life skills that are so missing. And along the way, we discovered that it's also about the parenting piece. Parenting these kids is a different kind of parenting. The tools you need are different kinds of tools. And even understanding the child they're very different from standard children. So you need to understand where they're coming from in order to be a good parent to them. And at a certain point, I was like, so many people are missing out on this. Like, I have to give this over to the people who need it.
And honestly, that's why we're doing what we're doing now, is because
Right.
I feel like that after years of trying to finally find a mahalach and a way that works, maybe not in a day, but really works.
It's
in
work.
the long
It
run.
is hard work. But you know what? Rome wasn't built in a day. And if we want to build in a shaman, then it's years of
Yeah, and
work.
a person doesn't grow in a day. No, and
Yeah.
in business, it's simple to understand. It's a process, and I think the process that I engaged in through our work has been such a blessing, and I'm really excited to share this with my circles and my people. So thank you so much.
So I tell you, the thing is that, if you go for a diagnosis, they'll give you a nice label. Give you a label of this, of that, the other, either letters, they'll tell you your child is gifted. And I work a lot with gifted kids. But what I found was over the years is that many parents, that term gifted is kind of frightening to them. I have no idea why. But what tended to happen is, and I've had this conversation even in the last week 3 or 4 times, parents say, no, my child's not gifted. He's not gifted. So at a certain point, we came to the conclusion that we needed to find a term that describes this kind of kids, but is less scary for people, right? And there's an English nursery rhyme poem about the very, very child. When she was good, she's very, very good. And when she's bad, she's horrid. And it was just that concept of being very, very, of being like more. That's what grabs people's attention. Because I think as a parent, I mean, maybe you want to share that piece, but as a parent, that's the experience we're going through. Is this child is somehow more, whatever they do is more than other people, what they feel is more than other people. Everything is just kind of intensified. But
Yeah.
this term intense is a bit problematic because people have taken it to mean all different kinds of things. So we looked for something, a little different.
Right. So very, very describes really what a lot of parents are going through with their kids. And rather than gifted or special or ADHD or whatever the certificate
Right.
they get, um, yeah, very, very really describes our kids. So the best way for me to introduce you is to share my personal journey, which I sort of keep sticking to not sharing because I feel like my son's journey is his to share and not mine.
Right.
Although so much of his journey is my journey. So I want to talk about it, my journey as a parent with our 7-year-old Levi, who's currently 7. And I try to refrain from doing that again because it's his life, and I don't know, what he's going to feel comfortable with and what he wants. But I do want to share that I got to meet you and your work after spending 2 or 3 years going to doctors, psychiatrists, neurologists, therapists, and the all I can say is the situation just got worse, and really nothing worked. And we tried every parenting tool. We were really good at it, and it didn't work. And I'm saying good at it because whenever we came back to the practitioner sharing that we did so and so, it would be like, you probably didn't do it. How long did you sit on the step? Did you hold him aggressively, or did you comfort him while you were holding him on the step? And I'm like, we were so good. We were 4 hours on the step. Poor kid.
You see, I find very much that piece is a lot of parents' experience. That they've done everything right and they've ticked all the boxes, but with the very, very kids, the techniques don't work. And one of the things that I did was to go back to, every time I hit one of these bumps, to go back to school and learn what needs to happen for this bump. So like working on the gifted piece, the intellectual piece isn't enough, right? There's the emotional piece, and there's the self-regulation piece, there's the sensory piece. And each time it's like starting again from the beginning on how to put that together into one child. And what I find is like a lot of parents have this experience that they've been to so many specialists and they've done every single thing, but there's no whole picture. It's like every bit's working by itself.
Right. Can you like break it down? Like you mentioned the very, very child is a term that doesn't specify a diagnosis, but it specifies a reaction that parents have to their kids.
Right.
Oh, my kid is so very, very.
So this is the funny thing. When people first come to me, they start to tell me, this is what my morning looks like. And I could stop them and then tell them how their morning's going to look like, right? Because it's not only about intensity in one area. When we talk intense, we're generally speaking emotionally intense, right? Someone tells you this person is intense, you assume it's an emotional intensity. It doesn't describe the intensity of the physical reactions, the intensity of the sensory reactions that these kids are having, or the intensity of the intellectual experience that they're going through. And it sounds like a strange thing to say, but there actually has been a lot of research done. And if you look up the overexcitability term, which describes 5 areas of overexcitability, that's really what we're talking about. Kids who overreact, they're overexcitable, right? So your morning will look something like this. First of all, obviously it depends a little bit on the child, but they either don't get out of bed, or once they're out of bed, they're so busy doing a million and one other things that they're not actually getting moving in the direction that you want them to go in. You might have problems with eating breakfast in the morning. Some kids, because their stomach is killing them before they go to school and they can't eat. And some because they can only have this type of food on this plate, at this temperature, in this room, on this tray, Or you can have the kid who just, one thing in the morning's gone wrong, and it's just like a kind of domino effect, and that's it. Their whole morning is shot.
Chaos.
It's just like they start screaming and they can't help themselves. They're done. They're done for the day, And as a parent, it's tough. It's like okay, now what do I do? And it's not a standard toddler meltdown. What did they tell you about toddler meltdowns? It only lasts a max of half an hour. Did anyone ever tell you that?
Yeah. No, not to me. No, they just told us that it'll be done. It'll linger by 2, by 3, sometimes to 4. And
each episode is max half an hour. So you only need to live through it for half an hour. It's not true about very, very kids. They can tantrum even overnight. They can fall asleep screaming and wake up the next morning still in the middle of a tantrum.
So that is something I'm familiar with, which is like hours and hours and hours. And this assumption that, the kid is not listening. That's what it seems like the kid is just not behaving. The kid is not listening. And
So
what you're saying is that they're just very, very...
I tell you what, when we say a kid's not listening, we're assuming a behavioral malfunction, right? Either the kid's a naughty kid or the parent is a bad disciplinarian, right?
Right.
That's the reaction you get from people when you see a kid screaming on the floor in the supermarket. And you're like, either these parents don't know what they're doing or this kid is just a bad kid. Yeah. And it's really, really not true. Very often when they hit that point, their emotions have broken down to the point where they can't actually, like, they hear you physically, but they're not in a place that they can process. So you're talking to them and they're not actually understanding what you're saying. Right?
But it seems like they are, because they make very rational, linguistic, verbal demands. Like, I want the toy, I want the candy, I want this, I'm bored.
They can tell you what's coming out from their head, but they're not absorbing what's going in. Right?
Even though they make eye contact and connect and express themselves.
Yeah. I mean, as an adult, has it never happened to you that you had a really difficult day and you come home and your wife starts telling you about what's going on and you can't hear? Like, you hear it all, but like, there's this kind of disconnect.
Yeah, there's this blur with reality or with things around because of stress or because of overwhelm.
Or because as a child, they haven't yet... we say very often with these type of kids that the EQ and the IQ are in like opposite proportions. So like the cleverer they are, the more difficult they find it to manage their own emotions, right? And this is one piece which I find parents struggle with so often. And it's like a conundrum that I always ask at the beginning of my parenting courses. If I have an 8-year-old who has the IQ of a 15-year-old and the EQ of a 3-year-old, what age do I treat them? Do I talk to them like intellectually like a 15-year-old? Do I treat them like a standard 8-year-old? Or do I take into account that this kid emotionally is only really 2 or 3? And I think many times with a very, very kid, you've got a lot of that dichotomy where you're expecting to have this package deal of a standard kid, which I think is a myth that doesn't exist. But okay, with these type of kids, the gaps are way bigger.
Yeah, so all I need to do is push a little and they'll level up. Like, they'll take the 15-year-old and relax him.
Don't teach them more at home. We'll just dumb them down. Don't you by teaching them more at home, you're making them higher than their age group, and you're causing us problems, right? Or don't be so nice to them. If you expect them to act their age, they will act their age.
Right. Yeah.
The question is, what is this mysterious age that we're talking about? Because, like I said, like, are we talking 15, 8, or 3?
Right.
Right? So the problem nowadays, I think, with many, many things is that we kind of make a mistake as parents. And it took me time as a parent to realize this myself. When we send to a school or any kind of institution, really, we're buying into a service, right? That service isn't, generally speaking, individualized unless you go for a special needs school, right? Yeah. Most schools are offering a package deal. We'll give your child maths, English, Chumash, whatever it is. We'll make sure they eat lunch at lunchtime. We'll make sure that they're in a safe space during the day. And that's it. And then as parents, when you put a child in who's not that standard kid, who needs a standard system, we're kind of disappointed that they're not getting what they need from school. But the school not giving what they've promised. It's just that this child needs something different.
Yeah. So what does the very, very kid look like in school? How does that come across? So, like, what are the phone calls that the parents are getting? Who are we talking to?
So there's so many varieties. I can give you a few examples, but there's so many varieties. It can be the kid who will only work standing up, right? It can be the kid who interrupts the teacher with questions that seem totally irrelevant, like completely irrelevant. What was it I had? Someone told me this week. Oh, they were learning about the Mishkan, I think, in school, and the teacher was describing, the size of the curtains or something. And this kid said, like, even if it was a miracle that they could weave it the way they weaved it, like the dyes were made from vegetable dyes, and where did they get vegetables in the desert? And like the teacher just couldn't.
That's a really good question.
It's a great question. But the teacher can't cope with it. It's like a second grade teacher is like, what are you talking about?
So sometimes teachers might think the kid is just challenging them for fun or
But
to be
they're really
difficult.
not. And that will bring me to one of my basic rules in child education. A child never does anything without a reason. And our job as parents is to try and understand, like, what is that reason, right? If a kid's having a meltdown, there's a reason for it. If a kid asks you a question that seems irrelevant, you need to take a step back and say, okay, what was that thought process that came to this point? It's like if a kid puts up their hand in class and says, where did they get vegetables in the mid-run? In the middle of talking about weaving curtains, the answer is, you weren't listening to me. The answer is, 1 minute, how did you get from curtains to vegetables? And that's a question that, like, many teachers don't always have time or patience for, like, to try and follow that train of thought.
To understand where the kid is coming from, yeah.
That's right.
Okay, which other phone calls might parents get?
You'll have parents speaking to teachers because they say the child is bored, and the teacher's saying, well, they're not doing well, so they're not bored. Right?
Mm.
This constant thing of the only way to measure whether a kid is clever is by if they get 100 on a test, and not understanding that a kid could get 70 and be bored out of their brains, right? It's the ones who fidget the whole time. They've got a million different things that they're busy with, right? It's the ones who always answer the exam questions with out-of-the-box answers, and the teacher's like, it's not relevant. And to this kid, it is relevant. It really is relevant. It's the kid who often will find friendship circles difficult. And that's less of a discussion you have with teachers, but more you'll have a child who comes home and says, everyone's being mean to me. And you know that it's not really everyone's being mean. Something here isn't going the way it ought to go, right? And then when you speak to the teachers will say, I haven't seen anything. But all it needs for a very sensitive kid is that one friend who said to them, oh, your skirt is dirty today, and everyone's being mean to them. And then you'll get the teacher saying, they're exaggerating, and stop complaining the whole time. And, oh, my favorite one, your kid needs to toughen up.
That they're less hurt or having less of a hard time emotionally. And what about physical fights?
So physical fights is very often not about very so much as a kid who's having trouble communicating, right? When a parent comes to me and says my child is being physically aggressive, my first question is always going to be, what's their communication skills like? Because physical aggression is a way of communicating without words, right? And again, no kid does something that's going to get them into trouble unless they can't do it the way they need to do it. So my question will be, why can this kid not communicate with words?
What about the kid that is just fighting reality physically? They want something and everyone tells them no, so they start fighting for what they want. The sibling, a friend, the parent, the teacher.
So again, if I ask myself, if I see a kid hitting out, right, and I sit down and I work out, they've heard 10 no's in half an hour. So I've got my answer. Why is this kid hitting out? Because they're feeling kind of confined. They're feeling like they have something they need and their needs are not being met. And the question is then, as a parent or as a teacher, how can I meet this child's needs if their needs are so different from the other people around me? And that's not only about a class of 20 kids. It can be in a house of 4 people, right? Stupid example. This kid wants to stay up till 8 o'clock and play their drums. And you've got a kid 3 years younger who needs to go to bed at 6 and can't sleep when they're playing drums, right? We live in a social environment, and very often we can't give every child exactly what they need, right? But when it works out that one child has very, very strong needs and it's against the very strong needs of the next child, that's when we start to have a hard time.
Don't I need to just like be a mechanic? That's not how it works.
No, because it's
Like
something
you're
to need.
suggesting. I'll elaborate. You're suggesting that if the kid is physical, then he or she is conveying a need. So the problem isn't in understanding their need. The problem is in them understanding that this is not how the world works.
So I think here you've hit a really important point, right? Because as parents, and again, even as teachers, we're struggling with the concept that we need everyone in this environment to be safe, right? So if one kid is hitting out, that kid has to be stopped, right? So the one thing is stopping the behavior because it's hurting other people. And then the
Right.
second thing is saying, okay, now what? So yeah, in the actual minute, right? You need to remove that kid from the situation because hitting out is hurting other people, and that's not okay ever. And that's a blanket rule that we have to make. Everyone here has to be safe. And safety means not being hit and not being scared. Right? But as a parent, so like, I don't know, 6 o'clock in the evening and your kids are, hitting each other and you remove them from the situation, you calm it down. So 7:30, they're all in bed, hopefully, and you sit down with your coffee. Your question to yourself needs to be not, oh, tomorrow he's going to hit again, and which room am I going to lock him in so he's not hurting people? But why did this happen in the first place? And if the answer is because he was trying to build Kapla and his younger brother kept knocking it over, which is normal, then my question isn't how can I stop him hitting, but where can he play Kapla that his brother's not going to knock it over for him? Right? So there's the immediate damage control, which is no hitting. And then there's the piece of, okay, now how are we going to make sure that this isn't going to happen again?
If I'm strict enough, won't he learn that hitting is not an option?
He'll learn that hitting's not an option, but he'll do something else instead. My third question would be, why couldn't he come to me and say, Mommy, he's knocking down my Kapla tower instead of thumping his younger brother over the head? Right?
Right.
So that's the communication piece. And there we sit the kid down and say, listen, you can't hit him over the head with a wooden block. You come and tell me. And some kids need to hear that 1,000 times before they can. But the thing is, if you as a parent keep the conversation open, then you'll listen at the end and you say, you need to come and tell me, Mommy, come and say to me, Mommy, he's knocking down my tower. If you wait to hear his reaction, he'll say, if I come and tell you, he's going to knock over all the rest of it. In the meantime, I need to stop him quick. And that's the communication piece. And many parents are missing on that piece because they say, no hitting. That's it. No hitting. Right? And they don't wait to hear why the child is hitting. And if you can come to that place, then the communication will work better. I have a very nice client, someone I've been working with for a long time. She bought her 8-year-old a little bell. And when his younger siblings are bothering him and he can't express what the problem is, he rings the bell. That's an amazing idea because you're teaching him to communicate. He hasn't got his words. Instead of being physical, he has a communication device. Right?
Yeah, and it must be exciting for the kid.
It's fun. It's a fun way out of a difficult situation.
I would like a bell.
Especially when you press the bell, someone comes and saves you,
Yeah, that would be nice. So I hear what you're describing, and I think that for a lot of parents, this is a far fetch because the behavior is so extreme and the effort is so big that it seems like all I need to do is police the behavior rather than start investing in a process of problem solving in probably 150 areas in a day or in a week. And it's really hard to buy in for a lot of parents to really focus on the second and third thing that you said, the why and how, rather than only the policing.
Right.
I came to the willingness to try something that takes longer, because in reference to my question to you, can't I just like teach him that hitting doesn't work? And the answer for me in my life was no, you can't. You
Not
can't
every
medicate
child
it.
can.
You
Yeah.
can't medicate it. You can't punish it. It's not a it, and it doesn't work. And I think that there's a whole genre of parents. I'm specific. I understand that your expertise goes way beyond only behavioral issues, but a lot of what I'm hearing and seeing and passionate about is like this extreme behavior, and the focus is always about like, how do I make it better, because this is so extreme, and these ideas you're proposing is so subtle, you know, a box, a separate box, a separate playing corner, and these things are like, how is that going to help this extreme behavior? And I guess my input on that is like, what if you find out that it's just not going to work any other way? Will you be open now as a parent to listen to a different mahalach, to a different perspective, to a new way?
Many times as parents, and this is no criticism, our lives are so crazy busy, especially often parents are working, and then they've got the pressure of homework in the evenings, right? And they've got to get the kids to bed on time because otherwise they won't get up on time. And they want to also see their spouse, from time to time. It's nice a couple times a week to touch base. Then you need to do food and laundry and keep the house tidy and do your shopping. And we're very, very overwhelmed. So what we tend to do is live in the now, right? Today I need food for my family. I'm not necessarily thinking about next week, right? Or about Purim, or about Shabbos even. I'm just like managing the now. And very often with the behavior, we're doing the same thing. The problem is, if you think about it, like the shopping example is a good one, right? I need cheese for supper tonight. I'll nip out to the supermarket and I'll get my cheese. Now, if I would think for a minute and say, 1 minute, tomorrow I want to make kugel for Shabbos, I'll buy the potatoes at the same time. I'll save myself a couple hours, right? In the short term, you can stop the behavior, but then you're going to carry on dealing with it for years and years and years on, right? It's like you're going to keep running back to that supermarket for a new refill. And each age, you're going to say, oh, so now, so at this age, 7, 8, 9-year-old, they're hitting out and I'm going to stop them hitting out, right? What are you going to do when they're 12 and they're mouthing off at you? You're going to put sellotape on the mouth? You're going to lock them in the bedroom every time they're chutzpah it? Because it will come.
Scream hard. Like what ends up happening is that when very, very kids turn teens, the houses are literally domestic violence. The nicest of people, parents that are not ever thought that they would be verbally abusive or screamers. The house is chaotic. They're shouting, they're screaming. They're the nicest people. They're really the nicest people. It's just there's this edge where the kid is, and the kid is like pushing the limits. They always have been pushing the limits. And in other words, the policing never worked, and it still doesn't work. It's just a grown person now.
It's more than that. I'll tell you, I don't agree that all the houses are screaming and shouting, especially nowadays when like everyone's got like some kind of device that they're using on the internet. You'll find the parents clocking out. They'll clock out. They're not prepared to be abused by their child. They have no response, so they clock out. They're on the social media, they're busy messaging a friend about this nightmare of an evening, and everyone's sharing their nightmare evening. They're planning an event tomorrow. They're watching something. They're reading something. They'll clock out because it's too hard. So even the best parents who say, what, in my house? No, I'm not verbally abusive. I'm not physically abusive. But you know what? Clocking out on your teen is emotionally abusive.
The points that you made about these three steps, like 1 is like the instant, 2 is why, and 3 is how. I think that the point that you made is a lot deeper than problem solving. It's to really give a child a chance in life. If I start focusing on the why and how rather than policing, I actually give them a shot.
It's about chinuch as opposed to reactions. Because chinuch is about putting in place, the basis for them to grow in. And you know what's the biggest nachas with these kids? These kids are kids who later on, they might look like they haven't noticed anything you're doing, and then suddenly that you'll hear them quoting you at other people. And then they got the lesson. They might pretend they didn't hear, but it's there. The foundations are there. Yeah. But it's something else as well, which we didn't touch on so much, which is that, think about it for yourself. when you're in a place where you feel emotionally safe and that the people around you hear you, so even if you have a problem, you can cope with the problem, right? When you're in a place where you feel that whatever you do, someone cuts you down, someone stops you, someone takes you out of the situation, then you kind of despair. And then a person's living in a place of trauma of like, for people to hear me, I need to make such a loud noise, right? Now, ideally, your teens had a hard day in school. You want them to come home and say to you, Mommy, I had a horrible day today, right? Especially with boys, that does not often happen. What happens instead is they come home, throw their bags on the floor, stomp into the bedroom and slam the door, right? And that's okay. That's pretty normal teen behavior. But when it turns into them walking into the house and kicking their younger sibling, then you've crossed the line, right? So a teen who feels safe and secure with his parents and who feels that they're prepared to listen to the why and the how, right? From when they're little, they're used to, if I'm having a hard reaction to something, Mommy's not just locking me in the room. She's actually thinking, why did that happen and how can I help it not happen again? So as a teen, they'll come with the same attitude. And a kid who's desperate, who's like, nobody in this place ever listens to me, as a teen will behave the same way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's all these stereotype comments where, okay, teenagers are like this. And I find that when parents do their work, which means to leave reaction into proactive, even on their own needs, which a lot of the work we have done, it was about understanding what we need as parents. So we actually have the ability to think of a child, of what they need as a child. And this idea that teenager is so and so is not particularly true. When a parent engages in doing their work, teenagers move completely away from the stereotype of what a teenager is, and they just express different, engage different, want things different.
I agree. Listen, teenagers are hormonal. Boys and girls. This myth that girls are hormonal and boys are not is just nonsense. Teenagers are hormonal, which means that their moods go up and down like a yo-yo, right? But if you've created a safe environment for all different kinds of moods in your house, right? When you're feeling down, you can say, Mommy, I want to be on my own right now. And no one's going to come and say to you, what happened? And you've got to tell me. And, the type of thing that kids find hard.
No, it's not chaotic. I got it.
Right. Yeah. Or when a kid feels intensely physical and they got to let it out, that there's a space for the emotion, then they'll have space for their emotions as a teen. Yeah. The emotions will still be there. Teens are teens, right? But the chutzpah and the aggression does not need to happen.
Right. So that's the value of creating this space of understanding and sort of problem solving and planning and solution, like problem solving in a more effective way, that it takes the edge of chaos away into a place where experiences can happen.
There's a safe place for their emotions. And then when they're feeling strong emotions, there's a container for them, right? Yeah. They don't need to overreact to them.
What is it with a lot of kids and just not wanting to go to school?
Do you always want to go to work?
I have to.
Yeah. So a child isn't necessarily in the place of self-discipline of an adult of, listen, if you don't go to work today, you won't have bread to eat. Right?
Yeah. But that's one, I have to. But then the real question is, how do I better it?
So that's a different question. That's a very different question. If you're asking why kids don't want to go to school, I'll say to you the same way, if you were sitting in an office and answering the phone all day, I can guarantee you would get, you specifically, your work is more adventurous than that. It's more exciting than that, right? If I gave you now an office job where you were doing the photocopying and sitting on the phone all day.
I would be a teenager protesting.
You would be a teenager. Right? For many teens, their experience of school is that kind of an experience. Right?
So what do we do? We tell them you have to? Like, how do you approach it? Or we focus on how do we better it?
No. So this is where, if you're a parent, I'll tell you one thing. And if you're a school, I'll tell you something different. Okay? As a parent, like I said before, you're buying into a service. This is the service the schools offer. It's these subjects that they're learning. it's this amount of tests, it's these types of teachers, it's this schedule and during the day, it's these type of kids who are in the classroom. That's what they're offering you, and you either buy in or you don't buy in.
What does not buying in mean? To consider a different school?
Different school, homeschooling, possibly engaging like a one-on-one teacher to pull them out when there's like, some subjects that are just not working.
I think at the beginning of a journey of moving from reaction to proactive problem solving and planning, parents have a big resistance to taking them out of a mainstream school. For me, I took so many steps in my life to really engage with the reality of my life in many different areas. However, I'm very understanding of what that means for a parent when they have a vision for the child that starts in kindergarten all the way up to high school, elementary school, yeshiva, and so on, to shidduchim, to marriage. And I can suggest put them in a different environment, but for that parent, that means they won't do a shidduch. No one is going to want my child because now they're in a different school.
Look, my kids are mainstream. Do I agree with all the mainstream ideas? Absolutely not. But yeah, that's the service we've bought into.
At what point are parents creating the problem by not understanding that they're protecting their child's shidduchim, but they're creating a generational mess by keeping them in that engaging in the system that doesn't help this school system, like what they bought into, it doesn't fit their child's needs. Like, at what point would you be like, okay, there's no modality to help unless they actually spend 8 to 10 hours, which is what they spend in a different environment?
So, I tell you what, it's a very hard question to answer because it's very different.
I know.
What the school, anywhere you go, there's different school environments, and there's places where there's only one Jewish school. I won't say to put a kid in public school because they're not happy in the Jewish school, right? But then there's the question of, do I mainstream or do I put in a special needs environment, which is basically labeling a child for life, and not everyone's comfortable doing that, and it's not
Right.
the right decision either.
And it's really, really tough. I think it's really, really tough, but also blinding. The worry about what's going to happen to them at 18 and which shidduch they're going to do is completely blinding the reality of who their child is. It's so stressful for parents. They so worry about what this staple that they're putting on their kid will do that it's very blinding to understand what the child's real needs are. No.
So I look at it slightly differently, okay? I look at it like this. When I'm considering a school for a child, I live in Yerushalayim, yeah? There are hundreds of from schools, okay? All kinds, shapes, sorts, and sizes, and it's often very difficult to work out, what you should be doing. I look at it like this. When I choose a school, I not only choose the service that they're providing is one that I like, I also choose the school where the service they're not providing is something I can fill in for the child at home. Okay? So let's say I have a standard average kid. I'll choose for them a standard school program, which is probably about the right level, right? With a bunch of kids who they'll be comfortable with, types of families who probably more or less fit in with your family. So, the school environment, a caring hanhola, like to me, that is top of the list, a hanhola who are a little bit flexible, who care about their students. The question comes up when you have a kid who's just like not in that standard box, right? So you have a kid whose needs are not going to be provided in the standard school you're choosing. Now, if that need is for extra intellectual stimulation, it's not so difficult. You can get an extra teacher to pull them out here and there, give them other lessons. That's a big power shot on its own when we deal with a gifted piece, but it's doable, right? When you've got a kid who, let's say, socially is not fitting in, and usually that's because you've tried it and it's not working, then my question to you is this a child who with support can fit in? Or is it a child who needs to be full-time in a supportive environment in order later on to be able to fit in? And that's always the question that we're asking. It's not about pulling them out from where they are. It's about, is there a place that will give them more what they need when they're 18? And when parents turn around and say, I don't want to label my child, I can guarantee you, that when you're talking shidduchim, a child who's not been given the tools they need to succeed in life is going to be way lower on the list than a child who's had lots of therapy, but right now they're a huge mensch. And
Right.
that's the place where people get confused. They're like, I don't want to give them this, and this because it's labeling them. But you know what? If when they're 18, some parents came to me not long ago with a 16-year-old girl who clearly had some kind of social, emotional difficulty. And they didn't want to deal with it. They belonged to a very specific group. And in that group, the girls get married when they're 18, 19. And they're like, if we take her for any kind of help now, so she's going to be labeled for shidduchim, like you're saying. But do you know what? She's not marriageable material without that. So, like, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's just not working.
Yeah, it's a very, very solid way to look at it. Not only do they have a label or not, but what you would do is start diving into which people are they becoming and really measure the full picture of potential. Like, one is that they don't have the label. The other one is they have a label and they're doing really, really well.
It's not even about the labels. It's about, if I have a responsibility as a parent, the chinuch is on me, not on the school, right? So first of all, as parents, we kind of delegate the aspects of chinuch to the school. And sometimes I think we're so busy that we forget that not all aspects of chinuch are covered by the school. And sometimes we need to think about what the school's not covering and try and provide that separately. What we want to look at is, if you're planning a weekend, right? You sit down and you work out, what do I want this to look like and how am I going to get there? And I think with children, in a way, we need to do the same thing. Like, when this kid turns 20, what do we want them to be able to do? What midas do we want them to be able to have? And then, work towards it. Instead of, again, we think in the now, I don't want my 4-year-old to smack his 2-year-old brother. Right? That's not really a kind of, it's an immediate goal. But really, my matara is that there's this child, when he turns 20, if something's hard and someone's bothering him, that he knows how to say, listen, this is difficult for me. What are we going to do about it?
Right. So this idea that the hardest part in as parents is the immediate reaction, like deal with the moment. But really, the long-term solution and the long-term focus is like, how am I educating my child? How am I giving them the tools and resources they need? Which has mostly not to do with the moment.
Yeah,
it has
100%.
It's literally like opposite extremes of focus. It's like in the moment that consumes, but as a child and their potential, the moment makes this little of a difference. Okay, so they stopped hitting or they stopped fighting, but they're still lacking direction, clarity, vision.
You basically said squash your emotions, right? You said to this child, when you're angry, you may not use your emotions, squash them down. And that's not necessarily healthy. And that's why you're going to have the teenager who'll squash his emotions up to a point and then he'll let it out in a very inappropriate way. Or you'll have the adult do the same thing.
Adults the same, and then there's that ripple effect. So we understand a lot of what the problem is, and I think you share the glimpse of what moving away from reaction, despite of how difficult it is, what the possibilities are when we start really finding the right support, which in my family's case was really working with you, but really educating myself not only on the reaction, but on really long-term planning and a holistic perspective on what this child is. From your programs, it's not only about behavior and education. There's a whole variety of things that you look at. Can you just run us through briefly just these different, what do you call them, pedestals or not, pillars?
Well, kind of the bottom line of the whole course, it's not even about behavior. It's about you and your child. Because there's a dynamic there as well, right? You'll find for yourself, very often, my child is reacting to me. And very often, my reaction to the child is something to do with me, right? A small example, yeah? I'm really sensitive to loud noise. If my kids are screaming, they're not going to have a nice mommy. They're not, because I'm so stressed out by the noise that I can't take myself to a place where I'm helping them, right? That's my problem. It's not their problem. And that's something that I need to work on, right? But the course starts really right from the beginning. And the first session is like, who is this child? We need to understand who this kid is, what makes him up, what his reactions are, what does he enjoy, what does he hate. Like, let's just understand the child and understand who is this child, right? Now, sometimes that involves diagnosis and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you have a child whose needs are far enough out of the regular parenting box that you need professional support. And sometimes it's not. It's just a very, very child with all the brachas that this entails. And in Yetz Hashem, when they're older, you get tons of nachas from them. But right now, you can pull your hair out, So the first thing is understand the child. The second thing we'll discuss is literally the basics, like the physical piece. Because a kid who's more sensitive, a kid who's very, very, will also react to the environment in a more extreme way. So, for example, they'll be sensitive to sugar. They'll be sensitive to lack of sleep. There's going to be lots of pieces to this that you need to understand better. I think we discussed like schedule for these kids is like ABC. Without a schedule, they don't flow with. They need the schedule in order to survive. There's basic physical pieces, right? We'll discuss about how the physical, emotional, and spiritual pieces all kind of club together, right? Because they're all kind of pieces of the same puzzle. And then we hit the hard work for parents, which is, how am I affecting my child and how is my child affecting me? And there's a lot of self-awareness that's involved in that piece. And only once we've got that background in place, we'll move across to the 7 areas of difficulty, which many very, very gifted children type, they all struggle with these 7 areas. I wouldn't say all, I'll say 85%. Okay? The first one is self-esteem. We'll discuss, even if a kid looks like they're, full of themselves and, the latest chatterbox and
they're very fragile.
Confident, inside the sense of self is
also very fragile.
Lacking. Yeah. So we'll discuss what that means and how to deal with it. We'll discuss what we mentioned before, the areas of excitability, like kids who seem to overreact to all different kinds of stimuli, whether it's physical, emotional, imaginational, the kids who don't seem to know the difference between truth and lie. Sometimes they're literally living in such a world of imagination that they honestly don't know. And then we yell at them, you're lying to me. And they don't know what you're talking about. So like all that kind of piece we'll discuss. We'll discuss the sensory processing piece, which some people, I think what tends to happen is you go to therapy for each thing your kid is struggling with. So you'll go to a speech therapist and you go to an OT and you go for physical therapy and you go for behavioral therapy. And what I discovered and why I started with this program is, with this type of kid, it's all a piece of the same puzzle, right? And instead of going to each specialist tells you something different, and you treat and you think, now I fixed my child.
There is schedule, stimulation, noise, I don't know which other piece, all happening in the same time, and speech.
And the communication.
It all happens at the same time in one moment. And then of course there's a lack of responsiveness to my boundary.
And also you standing there and you're like, okay, now what? Do I give him the sensory stimulation that he needs? Do I deal with the behavioral issue? And I'm already like this, and I'm not in a place where I'm stable enough to then take myself out of the picture and give my kid the confidence they need, So we'll discuss like how all that fits together. We'll discuss the kids who crave stimulation all the time and how, like, where does that come from and how can we work with that? We'll discuss self-regulation, right? Which is both for you and your kid. OTs tend to use like a sensory diet to deal with sensory stuff. It doesn't work with very, very kids. because their reactions are so extreme that they need in the minute to be able to work on it. And by handing over the regulation to them, we take the responsibility off us and we teach them again communication. I'm about to hit red. Could you help me get down from there? They learn to express what they need. We'll discuss about creating a safe environment for your child. And one of the pieces which we come to right at the end is about out and about. The tools when you're not in your environment that you've so nicely made your safe environment and your home where everything is like, ready for the child. And we'll discuss, so now what do I do when I'm going to grandma's house, And that's not how it's going to be. And there's going to be lots of people and it's going to smell different and it's going to be noisy.
Which is not about the child or the kid, which is about the environment.
A lot of the work we do is going to be about you understanding your child and creating a home environment that really works for them, which we've done that work and you can see in your house that's working well, right? But now what happens when you need to take them on a trip? All your hard work, it feels like it's all falling apart. So you do need the tools to carry that through to other environments. That's the basic outline of what we covered during the course. I will say it's very practical. It's very, very hands-on.
Yeah, I want to add to that each session will have a teaching and then conversation between parents and you, where it's actually applied in specific examples between each meeting. And it's not just a theoretical, but also tools to actually apply it. The course is also meant for a small group. So the value is that parents can hear other examples of other parents and feedback what happens in other homes, which can actually help them understand and get creative and help a parent regulate and also get more insight than just through understanding theory of okay, these are the principles, this is the teachings, but then in real time there's chaos and where do I actually
right.
start?
It's more than that, because one of the other reasons why I like to keep it small is because I like to make solutions that will work for the parents in the group, right? So, obviously, when I teach in Israel and people are living in a small apartment, some of the solutions are going to be different than people who've got a bigger space to work with. But even more than that, some parents are more sensitive than others. So I like to get to know the group well enough that when we do talk practical tools, that it is going to work for you, right? I'm not going to tell you like someone who's living in a 2-bedroom with 4 kids, I'm not going to tell them that they're going to make a safe place for their kid, which takes up half a room. They haven't got the space, right? But the same thing applies on the emotional place. Some people are more sensitive than other people, right? I like to get to know the people in the group well enough that when we suggest solutions, that they're kind of usable.
It's usable. How would you describe a course in a structured 12 weeks and in a group setting versus one-on-one? What's the when is which, or what's the benefit of either?
I tell you what, one-on-one coaching, I'll get to know you and your family really well, your child. And then every week we'll work just on what you need and it will build for your needs. The course is more general. So we'll cover everything. Some things will apply to you and some things may be a little less, because every child, bottom line, every child, every family, every parent is different. So the course is a little bit more general and less specific to your own situation, which is something I can only build when I'm working privately coaching one-on-one.
And what is the value of a course over private, assuming both cost the same?
So, first of all, I'll say that the course gives you a really solid background. It gives you a really solid understanding of what makes a very, very kid very, very. I've never had a parent say to me, I didn't get anything from that session. I've often had people say, you put so much information in there that I went away with too much, There's a lot of very solid background there that will give you a base to go away with. It brings me to another question. Parents often say to me, would you work with my kid? I will, right? I can give your kid an hour a week. You as a parent, by me showing you what to do in an hour a week, you can give your kid 30 or 40 hours a week.
which is to say on learning the principles, which
Right.
means on one-on-one I can get an hour, but when I learn the principles, I really educate myself around kids and
Right.
around behavior and about patterns and about perspective and goals and different education, and also
Right.
really learning what's out there. It expands my mind as a parent. I think the second very valuable thing of a course is the group dynamic. It really helps for parents to understand that
That
they're
you're
not
not on your
crazy,
own.
their
Yeah.
child is not crazy.
Yeah.
I think it's all unbelievable value. Some people are shy from a group dynamic. I would like to host you and do this because I find that there's something about group dynamics that is like can be found outside of a group dynamic. A certain
Right.
understanding and bigger picture about kids and parents and behaviors and problems that really helps a parent regulate.
That when in a group you hear someone else manage to do this, it helps you to actually make it happen instead of feeling like this is too difficult for me. Like you see someone else doing it, then it's much easier to buy in. So there's that piece. And also there's the piece like how much I tell you, I don't know if you've ever said anything that shocked me. I've seen it all before. However much I tell you that, when you hear it from another parent, it's very different.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I want to conclude this conversation with a few questions, a sequence of questions with quick answers. So, first of all, what's your mission?
So that's not a quick answer. I went into this for my own kids. Okay. The more I saw, like, the more specialists you go to, the more answers you get that bring you more questions. And the thing never ends. And what I saw is that this kid has a profile which applies to many other kids. And it's all lots of small pieces, but it's all the same thing. And I like to compare it like I have a basic laptop, right? It's a decent laptop because I use a lot of it for recording, but it's nothing, out the ordinary. A really good graphic designer buys an expensive laptop. It's way better. It's not just that the processor is better, but also all the programs work better, right? And the whole laptop is more sensitive to any kind of input, any kind of program. And it's the same thing with these kids. You can't just say, oh, their brain is like, better than other people's. There's also this, it affects every aspect of their life. It's affecting them physically and emotionally. And so when I started working with gifted kids and they say, oh, it's a normal kid with a high IQ, that's just not true. The high IQ is the brain, which means that it's affecting every single aspect of their lives. And that was when I went back to school and I went, not only specialized in gifted kids, I did the sensory piece and the emotional piece and the time management piece and the ADHD coaching piece and the ASD coaching piece and putting it all together to see that over here we have one picture, right? So my mission is to bring that holistic picture to any parent who can benefit from it.
The advice and the skills and the creativity you bring is really unique, and I'm really excited to do this and to host. What's your message to educators and maybe even mental health professionals who work with kids?
So that would be two different things. My message to mental health professionals is two things, really. The first one is that if you've seen one kid, you've seen one kid. If you've seen 100 kids, you've seen 100 individuals. And like these boxes of ADHD, ASD, this, you need to see the wider picture in these type of kids. But my bigger picture, my bigger perspective for mental health professionals is that gifted kids are a completely separate category. Their brains work differently. And you have to understand the way a gifted kid's brain works before you can really work with them. Standard techniques don't work. Standard parenting techniques don't work. And a lot of the techniques can even be harmful. So that would be my thing. Now, for teachers, I would say maybe similar, but like different. When you're teaching a kid in a classroom who is clapping things quicker, who asks questions more, don't find them annoying. They're not out there to annoy you. They don't want to upset you. They have an actual thirst to know what you're talking about. And they want answers to these questions. And I'll tell you one thing more. You don't need to have answers. You just need to accept the questions. If you say to a kid, that's a fantastic question, I don't know the answer, that's great. But to say to them, that's not relevant, or that's a stupid question, or we're not talking about that right now, that's dismissive, and it's not acceptable in any form in any classroom. Tell them you don't know. That's okay, right? Very often, interestingly enough, these type of kids, they want the question acknowledged, but they don't need an answer to it. So I'll say to educators, accept the questions for what they are, curiosity. They're not out to get you. They're not out to trip you up. They're just out to know. It's about them. And I'll also say that if you see a kid who is really bored and fidgety, you need to change your perspective from, my job as a teacher is to get the kid to the end of the year passing their exams for this year, and change it to, if this kid started this year at point A, at the end of the year he needs to be at point B. There's a mashal, there's a story they say about Reb Zusha. I don't know if you've heard this, that he said to his Talmidim once, when he goes up to Shamayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to say to him, Zusha, why didn't you reach Moshe Rabbeinu? He's going to say to him, Zusha, why didn't you reach Zusha? There needs to be, as a teacher, my job in first grade is not only to teach kids to read, it's to make sure that every kid came in at one point and went out somewhere else. And if you're seeing a kid who's not making any progress, even if they're capable of taking the exams at the end of the year right now, then you're not doing your job.
Rabbi Jonathan Rietti, I once heard a speech, I don't know if you're familiar, I once heard a speech of him saying that the word mechanech is different than a melamed.
Right.
The melamed teaches the book, and mechanech is from the core, the shorish word chen. And chen has very little to do with the book and has a lot more to do with v'nimtza chen v'seichel tov bein elokim v'adam, to look at the individual and to really, really, really understand the individual. And through that, then later comes I don't want to quote him because I don't know if he says exactly this way, but through that to really come to teaching, and then the book can apply. But yeah, I think you have a skill with understanding the individual and being really creative with it. It's like tweaking something just this little works so much better than forcing.
I'm not saying that the teachers need to re-prepare their lessons and teach something different, or if you've got a
It's a play of words sometimes. It's sometimes a play of words. It's saying like, that's a great question. I'm going to think about it. Wow, wonderful. Let's write down all your questions, like little small gestures, and the child feels valid and heard. And it's so little about the answer and so much about
it's not about the knowledge, and it's not even about giving them more difficult things to do. It's about how you're doing it, how you treat them.
So for closing remarks, what is a few good points to take away?
I think the first one is, you shouldn't ever label your child. Don't tell them you're stupid. Don't tell them you're clever. Don't tell them you're naughty. Like, don't label them, because they take that for themselves. Now, we do on the course discuss how to use that taking for yourself to help your child develop positive labels for themselves. Okay? But don't label the child for them. That's when you hit an adult who says, but I am lively, and it's not necessarily negative, but they're still fitting themselves into the box that their parent fit them into. So don't squash them in boxes. There's no point. I would never tell a child, I don't have time for you. You can say, right now, I can't give you time. Tomorrow I'll have time. But not that kind of cut off of, I don't have time for you. Right?
When if a parent says, if I tell my child you're so bad or so misbehaved, is that a label?
Yeah, that's a child who's going to walk through life saying, I'm bad. Right? They're going to have that attitude. And often it's subconscious. But yeah.
It's a big ask.
Take it for themselves.
To say you're garbage is like, I think the world progressed. So that's not a big ask. Parents can agree, but sometimes these labels are so subtle. Even positive labels, like you're so smart. It's like, that can also put them on could be difficult.
One thing I find like parents using is like, everybody knows you're not supposed to label a child. So they'll, instead of saying, I don't know, you're annoying, they'll say you're being annoying. Your behavior is annoying. And they think they solved the problem by doing that. But it's not really, because the child just labels himself as a person whose behavior is annoying.
It's part of it.
Yeah. It doesn't really work. I think that if you do need to criticize a child in that way, you need to take a story, like take the narrative with you. So, like, when you knock all the cutlery off the table when I've just laid the table, that makes me feel frustrated.
So it's not about their identity and who they are. It's
It's
about
not
the
about them,
cutlery.
it's about
Okay.
the action that's just happened. Like, that makes me just frustrated, you know? When you're screaming and crying for a whole hour, that makes me feel like I don't have any energy left.
Yeah, I think these two really incorporate a lot of the unintentional negative messages that I might be giving my child. Like, I can't handle you, or this is too much for me. And it comes across as for the kid to understand that this is not helpful for them, but really I'm just putting my inability on them,
So
which
you
is
could just switch that around and say, when you scream and shout for now, it makes me feel like I just can't handle this anymore. There's ways of doing it. On the whole, I think parents are doing a good job. Sometimes you need different tools. And I think with the very, very kids, what happens is you go and you do a parenting course and you use all the techniques perfectly and it doesn't work. Because these kids need a completely different parenting structure. And that's something I learned the hard way. And I'm like, I'm going to give this to people, like, take my experience, and you don't have to go through what I went through in order to get to that point.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
No, my pleasure.
At this point, I look at my kids as a whole and I really believe in them. Despite the circumstance of the moment, as a parent, it's one of the most beautiful things that I can look at a child, no matter what's happening around me. I actually believe in them. So even if I don't know how to solve a problem, I'm able to look at my kid and see, like, they're going to do fine. They're going to be okay. Maybe it'll take 3 months, 6 months. I'm not scared anymore of 12 months.
6 years, 10 years.
I'm not scared of that anymore. I understand that engaging in a long-term process rather than only the reactive of the hardship that I have or they have. My mindset shifted of, like, what's going to be with you. In Yiddish, there's like, "Wus geht zusammen dich?" There's this thing that I grew up with, like, "Wus geht zusammen dich?" Wer geht zusammen, wenn du wachst auf? And I don't have these thoughts in my head because through the work that we have done and the teachings and specifically the understanding of these different pillars of what a child is made of and what they need. And when something is difficult, I really, really believe in them. And it's a phenomenal feeling as a parent to consistently, no matter how I feel or they feel, to actually believe in them. For that, I'm so grateful. So thank you so much.